She is the executive director of the Economic Hardship Reporting Project and an author of 4 books. I am joined now by Alissa Quart via Skype. She is here to talk about her new book, Squeezed: Why Our Families Can't Afford America. Welcome, Alissa. It's great to see you.
Oh, it's great to be here.
So I'm loving the book. I think you have hit the nail on the head in terms of how American families across the country are feeling. And yet at the same time, we have all these great economic numbers. Unemployment is low. The stock market is high. Things are all better now under Trump's economy, right?
Well, that's the joke of it. I mean, we may be having higher employment levels than before, but wages are simply not keeping up and prices are skyrocketing. And what I saw on the ground was people were working jobs that they didn't like, and they were barely seeing their children. So maybe they're working, but they're not working the optimal jobs for them, and they may be doing multiple jobs.
One of the things that really struck me about your book is the way you discuss the shame that people feel that they're not able to make it. And that really struck home for me. I was actually talking to an Uber driver who used to have this middle class life, and then she lost her job, and now she was working for Uber, and she hadn't been able to keep her apartment, and she felt like it was her fault. And even though intellectually she knew it wasn't her fault, she couldn't help but feel ashamed that she was in this precarious position. Did you find that that was a common sentiment for folks?
Yeah, I found people were really blaming themselves, wondering what they did wrong. They may have, college degrees, graduate degrees, even multiple degrees, and somehow they were not. They had to do side hustles, and they didn't get to do what they wanted professionally, and they weren't making enough to pay for themselves or their children.
So, what are the main expenses that have gone up that have made life so difficult for families?
The main expenses is housing, which is tripled or quadrupled in some cities. It's things like education that has public colleges have doubled since 1996, and private is even more. And things like daycare, which can eat up 30 to 40% of people's salaries.
How are people managing? To me, the daycare thing is just unbelievable what it costs. And especially if you're working in a job that requires you to be in early hours or work late hours and have a schedule that's all over the map. How are people even making this work at all?
That's what I saw. I saw people having to really struggle. I mean, things like universal pre-K that exists in New York City now, it's gone up from 20,000 to 68,000 seats in 2 years. To me, that showed me this is what we need to make it work. But then people are also doing things like barter and trade. I mean, just really medieval. They're living together as non-romantically, non-biologically related, but they take care of each other's kids. They pay for rent together. So we're sort of going back to these primeval forms because our nation is neglecting us.
Do they find those sort of unusual living arrangements, do they find them satisfying? Do they enjoy them? Do they find it inconvenient? What is that like for them?
I talked to a few groups of people who did, they call it co-parenting. And some of them, it got really hairy. They disliked each other by the end. But I also found people who were really made it work. I talked to a woman who had been, she was first generation, and everyone in the house was also from the islands and other countries that were close by, and they really shared parenting values. They cooked together, and these were all middle class people. They were teachers and social workers, and they knew they had to join together because Boston was a really expensive city, and it worked great for them.
How do you define middle class? What's your definition in the book?
Well, the working definition is 42,000 to 125,000 earning a year, but I think of it as an imaginary category as well, like something that people think they are. And it comes along with education and certain set of aspirations and certain kinds of managerial professional classes that we thought, oh, this is going to, these jobs are safe, like being a lawyer or being an accountant. And some of it's like a fantasy space for the American dream as well.
Yeah. Well, one group of people that I think we've always thought of as sort of quintessentially middle class were teachers. And we saw this year this massive movements of teachers in red states in particular across the country essentially saying, you aren't paying us enough to live. without having a second job, without having to, do all kinds of crazy things to make ends meet. Did you find that as well in your reporting for the book?
Yeah, I did. I found people who were driving Uber and Lyft on the side, like your Uber driver. And I was finding people who were, painting houses in North Dakota, after the school bell rang, because oil prices had made housing go up in that area. So suddenly they were making $32,000 and that wasn't covering their rent. So yeah, I met teachers who were grading at stoplights.
Did they expect that that's what a life as a teacher would look like?
No, of course not. They thought they were doing something. They thought correctly that they were the backbone of this country, and that's the point of the book. I think that we need to support these jobs. This is what it means to be American: is to have these kind of all these support jobs, the municipal jobs, the librarians, the teachers. They keep this country going, and that's what These people aren't reaching for the stars. I say they are reaching for the ceiling, and we should make it possible for them to support us.
Did you find any hope? Because I look at the economy and I see that, the most common jobs are cashier, sales clerk, fast food worker. These are low-paying jobs, very difficult to make ends meet. And then you look at traditional middle-class professions like teaching, adjunct professor, writer, where even, these sort of traditional bastions of middle-class success are also under attack. Did you find any hope that there might be a way to turn the economy so that workers can actually make it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that we can do is we can start creating. I mean, these are things that we've talked about before. Affordable apprenticeship programs, not these expensive certificates in for-profit colleges. We can also start regulating the for-profit and the regular universities so that people are not left with college debt. So I think there's really straightforward things we can do. We can also start considering, as more people are considering, universal basic income, which is a little bit of money every month that makes lives like the ones that I wrote about more possible. And then finally, start voting differently. And I don't know how else to say this, but voting for people who support family-friendly policies. And we may have to do it on the local level because obviously there's such a block nationally.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the message of your book, which I think is a starting point, that if you find yourself in a position where you're having trouble making ends meet, or you're having to take the second job, or you're having to, have these unusual living arrangements, whatever you're having to do, that you're not alone and it's not your fault. And I think if we have that realization as a country, we kind of throw out the bootstraps nonsense and realize the reality of the situation that the economy's created for us, then we can start to move forward with some of those solutions that you've outlined there. Alissa Quart, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I'm loving the book. Thank you so much for writing it.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
All right, we'll be back with more Rising after this.